Maverick Physical Therapy, TZ1B, TZ1C, pitching mechanics with a left lateral lunge and an LXI sagittal plane lunge. The left foot in this internally rotated position. Showed you what it would look like to just basically transition through the basics right there. But I'm going to show you what I like to do before I even get to that point to help further the loadability and transition into those transformational zones right here as we use another lunge to load up the right hip. So what I like to do in terms of getting a little more, kind of tweaking a little more internal rotation or disassociation to the matter, is adding an opposite side kind of transverse plane lunge here, anterior medial lunge, and a medial lunge. Also kind of play around as well with kind of presetting the trunk and adding some presses to the mix as well. But let me kind of show you what I'm talking about a little bit. So if I were going to go into a TZ1B, I would maybe do this opposite side transverse plane lunge and then transition into TZ1B and jam with maybe an uncommon shoulder to overhead press in the frontal plane, or maybe in the transverse plane. I could use that same anterior medial vector, and instead of rotating my foot right side to the right lower extremity, I could just transition with a kind of a crossover a little bit more, or I could go into straight medial lunge, kind of load up the hip into a little adduction before it transitions into abduction. So I go here to here, boom, 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 boom. I can also, in the sagittal plane, and we'll go a little bit more kind of hybrid of transverse and frontal here in a second too. So to get that component of extension going, I will go into getting a little more flexion. Rather than here what we did, we're getting some extension into the mix. So I'm going to go and I'm going to tweak kind of sagittal and then frontal plane. So I'm going to go with this posterior medial crossover. Boom. So I'm going to load with some flexion, adduction, and internal rotation and transition into TZ1B. And if I want to go a little bit just more sagittal, I'm going to maybe add some form of kind of posterior lunge. So it could be here and then into TZ1B. I like to get a little more flexion of that lead side hip, knee, and foot and ankle in terms of the dorsiflexion, in terms of the knee flexion and hip flexion. So I'll go with just a straight posterior lunge. Boom, TZ1B. And in some previous episodes, we're actually going to add some pick and some presses to this. We're going to add some lunge and some presses, maybe with both arms as a teeter-totter, either a common or uncommon. I'll share with you my strategies for those, or just maybe a single arm, or presetting the right arm, the throwing arm, into a preset kind of throwing like position with kind of some lunge sequences. What I'm going into and playing with my TZ1C stuff, I'll preset almost with a sagittal plane lunge, with the right foot not quite facing straight anteriorly, 0 degrees on a clock, but I'll transition to my LXI kind of positionings here. So things that I'll most typically do, one right off the bat, if I want to go just a little more of a sagittal tweak for it, I'll just go with a posterior lunge, and I'll go frontal plane, kind of uncommon, transverse plane again, common and uncommon, shoulder overhead presses, but I like to load the hip into flexion so that I can propel it out into extension. helps me get a little more extension, helps me get a little more translation moving forward towards home plate, which is going to delay the motion from the top down in a big bad way. I will then start to add like a posterior medial lunge and then transition into TZ1C, because now I go into this flex adducted internally rotated position to extension, abduction, and external rotation. Love those positions. So boom and boom. And again, any form of driver you'd like to with the upper extremity with our pressing matrix. And we get a little fancy smanchy and kind of go off trail with those as well. I will progress a little more advanced, but now I'll start doing, let's say, like a little medial lunge, or in terms of really winding up the internal rotation to give me good external rotation, I'll go with a transverse plane opposite side rotational lunge here. So I'll start here, and then I'll transition in, boom and boom. So I'll go here, and then I'll just hop right across. So internal rotation, and then if I want to go after kind of some frontal plane a little more, I'll go medial lunge, boom, and then I'll transition into TZ1C. Those are the techniques for my strategies. TZ1B, TZ1C, starting to kind of grind through that surface level stuff to get really to some good grass-fed material. Play with those.